Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all okay, and welcome to the lecture series of the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. Hello, John. Welcome to virtually welcome back to Barcelona. It's great to have you here with us. It's a great pleasure today to welcome John Palmesino. John Palmesino is an old and good friend of IAAC. Together with Ann Sofi Rönnskog, they are running Territorial Agency. Territorial Agency is a very peculiar, let's say, practice. It's an independent organization. It's a place of action, a place where combination of architecture, of territorial analysis, of advocacy, of action, is coming together in order to create integrated spatial transformation of contemporary territories, but also a place that through their projects, they are actually, on the one hand, raising awareness and understanding how different kind of information, territorial information could help us read the current transformations, but also raise awareness on how this could eventually change by different actions. John Palmesino is also involved in academics, and he's teaching at the IAAC together with Ann Sofi. And their last project, their projects, he will be sharing with us today a variety of different ways of approaching territory, but some of the last projects of the office include the Oceans transformations that they actually won the STARTS Prize Award of the European Commission on Technology and Innovation that brings together arts and culture and okay, I was muted. Did you hear anything of what I was saying? No? Hello? Hello?
We heard up until arts and culture.
Ah, okay. I accidentally muted myself. So they won the STARTS Prize Award of the European Commission, and their projects include much more than the Oceans transformation, but the Museum of Oil with Greenpeace, so different other projects that I hope John will be sharing with us today. No more to add from my side. John, it's a pleasure to have you back. I hope very soon in person as well in Barcelona. Welcome, and please, everybody, let's enjoy the talk of John Palmesino.
Thank you very much, Areti, and it's such a nice pleasure, as always, to be with IAAC. I am going to share with you some of the latest work. I think that last time we updated you on what we were doing is a really long time ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So it's been a long time. Is there a way to somehow make this coming in sound a little bit quiet? And I would appreciate that. I'm going to share the screen with you this evening, and I'm going to spend around 40 to 45 minutes introducing you to what we think is the key element of contemporary engagement with the climate chaos, which is a project that we call Climate Peace, an attempt to readdress the upheavals of the Anthropocene through a spatial reorganization, through a spatial reorientation. I will, in the process, put on the table some hypotheses of work about the relationship between architecture and advocacy, between architecture and different forms of knowledge about contemporary polities, and we will see as we move along, maybe there are questions that you want to raise, and I'm happy to answer them at the end, but I'm also very happy if you have immediate questions during the talk. So let me start by sharing my screen this evening. So here we go. I'd like to start really by thinking together about a new figure that is emerging, that is yet to be completely outlined and understood. And it's a complex figure that from within seems very familiar to architects. It seems very familiar to those of us who are involved in the design and the transformation of cities, of the built environment. It seems a new figure that is made up of the elements and structures that we consider within our domain, the things that we design, things that we build. The new figure is a particular condition through which human activities start impacting on the Earth, and the Earth systems are articulating now a series of feedback loops, both positive and negative, in reaction to this figure. And it's what Peter Haff, the paleontologist, calls the Technosphere. It's a figure that is made up of all humans, everything that sustain us, everything that we deploy to basically eat, domesticated animals, plants, plantations, fisheries, and the energy structures that sustain that, and the information flows, the bureaucracies and the cities. It is a new figure because it has now reached a magnitude of 30 trillion tons that is only comparable to the biosphere, only comparable to the entire land-based biosphere of the planet. And it's a new paradigm of the planet. It's a new system that is self-organizing, it's quasi-autonomous. We are a major component of it, but we're not the main drivers. So 30 trillion tons is the first territorial marker that I would like to remember this evening. 30 trillion tons. It's similar to around 27, 28 centimeters of rubble everywhere. And that's the material basis, the trace fossil, the footprint, some would say, of that human activity that starts being understood as the Anthropocene. It's basically a gigantic element of debris that from within we think we are the main drivers. We are the main initiators of the Technosphere, but we also understand that and because it's now of such a magnitude and it interacts with the different paradigms of the Earth, we are now working for its sustainment. We are in a situation of an inversion of agency. The Technosphere is a gigantic system that a techno-colossus, to use the word of Bruno Latour, that basically tries to metabolize fossil fuels and churns out a gigantic layer of debris, and that is left mainly in the atmosphere, but eventually changes the composition of the chemistry of the ocean, acidifies the oceans, and changes the way in which the land-based life operates. Eventually, that set of relation will get into a new balance, but basically we've put into the atmosphere debris that will remain there for hundreds of thousands of years. And in the meantime, this is the most difficult thing, that debris in the atmosphere and in the structure is starting to organize itself, operating well beyond our control. It's also a situation where the increase of fossil fuels burned into the atmosphere, and the debris, of course, is carbon dioxide, modifies the cycles of regulation of the planet. And so the more the more debris we put in the atmosphere, the more it goes into the ocean. And the more CO2 we have in the atmosphere, the more it goes into the ocean and inland as well. So when we will have to change that, we'll have to take in consideration feedback loops and delays and structures of relationship. The difficulty for architecture is double. First, we did not see it coming. Architects did not see the Anthropocene coming. We notice it when it's already happened, and we are shocked that everything that we thought was a good is turning out to be a bad. And the second element is really this differentiation in agency, the fact that we are no longer the main driver. And 30 trillion ton is a new figure that rearticulates the relationships between polities and the spaces of operation, what we would consider architecture, and modifies deeply the relationship between life on the planet, plants, animals, bacteria, fungi. And the way in which we are trained is to think that the technosphere, for instance, in this series of images, is the figure rather than the background. So it will be the pipelines, it will be the water system, water hydraulic systems, in this case in Telemark in Norway. It's something that we can clearly distinguish from the stable and almost inert backdrop. In reality, we understand very clearly that the material and the energy fluxes that characterize the technosphere go well beyond that notion of the artifact and transform the sedimentary fluxes of the planet, blocking, for instance, the majority of the sediment from reaching the seas, making the deltas sink more and more, transform land patterns, vegetation, migration, animal movement. And they have now a disruptive capacity and all and everywhere. So this is really for us a moment where facing this 30 trillion tons, which is a rough calculation that we've done with our friends of the Anthropocene Working Group. And if you want to look more carefully, it's really a rough calculation. It's urban areas, rural housing, rural roads, railways, cropland, pasture, land and eroded soil, plantation forest, each one with a particular area and a thickness and a density that basically leads up to 30 trillion tons. Now, we are interested in that simple question, how heavy is a city? Because it's a simple question that opens up a very difficult set of relations. First of all, the city is no longer what it used to be. It's no longer the site of political engagement. It's no longer contained within political structures, well beyond that. And it has become a logistical system. It has become a system of constant improvement of the transportation and the extraction of value. But it's ultimately a figure that is rearticulating territories. It's rearticulating how we attach ourselves to what keeps us alive. And territories, as you know, are markers of deterrence, of terror. The etym is really in terrere more than in terra. It's in the notion of terror. It's a semantic and notion. The other marker, of course, is the latest CO2 reading on the top of Mauna Loa in Hawaii at the Scripps Institution Keeling Center, 419.05 parts per million of CO2. Two markers, 30 trillion tons, 419 million. Now, this is the latest figure updated on the 7th of February, and you know very well this killing curve. Let's look at it more clearly. This is the last week, and you see the daily average, and you see that in winter in the Northern Hemisphere, we are more or less on a constant night and day shifts because of the different moments in which the biosphere basically breathes in and transformed through photosynthetic processes the energy of the sun into fixing carbon and splitting hydrogen and oxygen in parts and emitting oxygen and maintaining that level of inhabitability of the atmosphere. The last week, the last month, again, you see the ebbs and flows, ups and downs, but you also see the last 6 months, slowly starting to rise again after the September in the fall, and the last year, summer and winter cycle, the last 2 years, a little bit more clear, the breathe in and breathe out of the Earth system, and how we are starting to modify that. And we're starting to impinge territorially with that 30 trillion tons of technosphere and logistics and expansion of the city on the breathing of the Earth. The ice core data before the measurements at Mauna Loa indicate that the level of CO2 has never been half as high as it is today during the industrial age. If you're interested in the thousands of years ago, you can go back all the way to the beginning of the Holocene, and you start seeing that we are somewhere up here. 2020 is there. 2000, when we started discussing about the Anthropocene, we were already up here, and everything before that during the last interglacial, this interglacial period, we've been less than half. If you're still not convinced that this is a territorial marker for transformation of not only epochal dimension, but really a major revolution of the Earth, you might want to look at the thousands of years ago record that is contained in ice core data, both from South Pole and the Greenlandic ice sheet. And you start seeing, now this is where we are today. This is thousands of years, so 100,000 years ago. Now this is the interglacial the glacial period when we warm up, the previous warming up, the ice ages, never been so much. And so this is the real question. How do we encounter this new figure in the making that we thought we were in control of? How do we create, and this is really our proposition, an architecture of diplomatic encounters, of public engagement, of reshaping the relationship between polities and their material basis of operation? That means, how do we reshape an architecture where we pay attention and we start sensing this new figure in the making, and we start understanding how to become sensitive to it? Because we don't see it. We did not see it coming, and we still don't see it. The Earth eludes our vision. The Earth does not want to be seen. In particular, Gaia does not want to be seen. So this is maybe where we can start understanding a little bit how we at Territorial Agency think of architecture in relationship to the very complex notions of advocacy, the possibility of promoting a specific form of change. When we talk about diplomacy, we're not really talking about situations like this and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meetings. And we're not talking about the conditions of politics of the world. We're interested in understanding how the Earth moves against the world and is not interested in the processes and procession of the making of the world system, of the international space. The Anthropocene Observatory, a project that we developed with the House of World Cultures and Armin Link and Anton Franke, is a project that starts observing the institutions, observing the Anthropocene.
So space has disappeared. We are sublunar, which is a completely new situation. And yet, the great discovery is that this is a new Earth in intensity, not in extension. So certainly it has agencies. After having spent 3 centuries denying agencies to the Earth, I mean to the object and making it build of matters of fact and dry and middle-sized goods, suddenly the Earth is back with agencies. Not as one, but full of agencies.
That was not only characterized by the financial and economic crisis that has, in a sense, preoccupied so many countries in the last few years, but also by the question of how will further science further accelerate the confidence, the momentum, and the willingness of countries to step beyond the current comfort zone of agreeing internationally on actions to respond to that scientific evidence.
So this is time, but I'm not sure what the scale is. It looks like it almost has to be daily.
The Anthropocene Observatory is a project where we engage in large institutions, cultural institutions.
You know, of course, the whole notion of the Anthropocene is that people are now a geological force, that we're causing changes as big as major geological events like meteors and so on have caused in the past.
And the idea is that this institution starts discussing the cultural dimensions of the hypothesis of the Anthropocene, the scientific theory underpinning the new geological epoch, and our intervention with Admin Link and Hansen is to create then an architectural setting of public encounters, in this case that leads to the Anthropocene working group, the scientists that are collecting the evidence to engage in a completely different way with the cultural debates. So it's a way in which we convene, and by observing and debating how people are observing, we try to modify the gaze, try to modify the orientation of the multiple agents that are operating with us. A second project that I want to put on the table in relationship to the notion of public diplomacy and notions of the setup of an architecture of diplomatic encounters and transformative encounters is called the Museum of Oil, which is a project that we developed with Greenpeace. Greenpeace is a very large environmental organization that you might have heard of. It's like the McDonald's of environmentalism. It's everywhere. And what we did with the Museum of Oil was to help them think how to combine a number of initiatives that are apparently in contradiction one with the other. How do you maintain focus, let's say, on safeguarding the rainforest of the Amazon, and at the same time try to mobilize the people from South America in safeguarding the ice sheets of Greenland, the Arctic, and the Antarctica. So the Museum of Oil is a research project that we deployed, where we deployed a team inside Greenpeace to reorganize the information flows in order to readdress them spatially, so that we could somehow form coherent entities, territories, spatial organizations of a particular coherence that we could start describing as being moved completely by oil. The hypothesis of the Museum of Oil is, of course, that the great acceleration that is marking the rise of the Anthropocene is driven by oil. Oil is power, not only in energetic system, but it's power in democratic forms. It has access to all forms of political power, all forms of political representation, parliaments, and elections. And we are, for the first time, entering a situation where we need to understand together how to move away from that. And this is a really difficult situation, because every single moment of that rapid acceleration is a moment of further expansion. And if we look at the same data, the global energy assessment data of energy consumption by humans, we see a series of waves. We start seeing the rise of coal that brings away the dependency on the biomass. Then we see the rise of oil as a third wave, eventually gas, and coal starts waning out. And if you're interested, renewables is that little wiggly line down there. So the question is, how do we understand this energy transition and the series of energy transition, all based on fossil fuels, all based on petroleum and carbon, as architectures, as coherent bodies? Of course, the cities, the small city-states organized around large quantities of forest characterized by the burning of the biomass at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, are small entities. We're talking about less than 1 billion people still that are basically running the structures still around that notion of the city. As we move into the deployment of large quantities of energy through coal and the movimentation of enormous amount of materials, we start seeing the city transforming to the city of large organization, in particular, large bureaucratic systems, large parliamentary systems that are connected to empire. And the international space after the end of World War II that rises with the notion of independence of nations and their capacity of dealing with the natural assets and in forms of exchanges, of course, that marked by oil. It's a system of regulating oil. So what happens next? What is the next step when we have to move away from oil, when we shall need to keep oil in the ground? And this is really the structure of the Museum of Oil. We are organizing an institution in the making, a new form of space where you can encounter the multiple difficult decisions that we have to make, and there will have to be many, to keep oil in the ground. But who should keep oil in the ground? Me? Why not you? The point is that we can't keep oil in the ground and maintain the current structures of our life. Oil is what sustains us. It's what carries humanity. It's what we eat through the Haber-Bosch processes is at least more than 2/3 of humanity eat directly food produced by oil. So the Museum of Oil documents the territories that are being completely shaped and wrought by oil and that are at a tipping point in order to preserve them, in order to engage with a set of radical conservation processes. And it's a space that is populated by these looming structures that are about to fall on you, that document the shale boom in Texas, or the complete destruction of the Niger River Delta, or the transformation and militarization of the global supply chain in the Middle East, or the depletion of the ice sheet in the Arctic, Russia, and the multiple oil spills that are undocumented, that every year spill the equivalent of 7 deepwater horizon into the Arctic Sea, undocumented. So it's a way of documenting, of making us alert to a particular form on which we depend. It's not clear, and there's a moment of ambiguity when the Museum of Oil is. It's not clear if we're looking at the past, as if we would be looking at the prehistoric people and understanding how is it that these people were so dependent on oil? What were the beliefs? What were the anthropological organizations? Or whether it's a current picture of the difficulties, or whether it's a picture of the future and a situation where we really made mistakes and we did not keep oil in the ground. So this ambiguity, the structural ambiguity of the condition and operation of a museum is really what interests us in articulating a notion of architecture of diplomatic encounters. The diplomatic encounter is a moment where the terms of engagement are not held by any of the parties. They're not held in advance by the people that need to encounter. You know that the other has something for you, or that you want something from him or her, and that they want something from you. But the terms of engagement need to be built together. They need to be built as you encounter. They need to be structured as a form of architecture of cohabitation. So when we talk about the Museum of Oil, we're talking not only of the multiple disruptions of oil spills and the debris of CO2. We're talking also about the multiple ways in which oil disrupts before it's even taken out of the ground. For instance, by disrupting the livelihood of marine life, as in the case of this video that shows the gun blast, the incredibly loud sound that destroys the livelihood of marine life in the seas, while prospecting for oil, while looking for new knowledge about the planet. We know today that that constant bang is the equivalent for humans of being exposed to a jumbo jet taking off, and the violence of this is becoming more and more and more, and there's no peace in the ocean, and the sounds are completely destroying life and livelihood, and there's levels of stress that this imposes on
did we lose John? He's frozen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let him know. Okay, I guess he was
hello.
Oh, okay, you're back. Good.
I've been kicked out for a second.
You are back and you can continue.
I need to share the sound. Sorry about the interruption.
No worries.
Oil is a liquid commodity. And what is important in oil is that as resources are depleted, you have to substitute those reserves. You have to replace the reserves. And this creates the maddest spree to find more and more resources before they are even taken out, in order to maintain the reserve replacement ratio, which is one of the key indicators of the financial markets of commodities that allow, for instance, a situation like this one, which is a multi-temporal image of Athabasca in Canada, to indicate this incredible expansion of extraction of tar sand, oil sand. Imagine an asphalt mixed with sand that you need to refine in order to get energy out of, and in that process you have to use as much energy as you actually take out, and then you have to bring it in pipelines that cross the North American plains on sacred land, for instance at Standing Rock, in order to arrive in places like Whiting in the south of Chicago, where they are refined and creates incredible pollution in the water and in the air of people in order for you to be able to drive around. So the question of this incredible expansion is related to reserve replacement ratio. How do we start taking that into consideration? How do we operate architecture vis-a-vis extraction of such a magnitude, the 30 trillion tons and the 419 part per million that are the two markers that we started indicating? In the case of Athabasca in Canada, this is the largest single industrial operation in the world. But what is crazy, so to say, the mad part, is to start seeing and understanding how the extraction of oil is anticipated by the extraction of forest, the cutting of forest in a very thick grid, a sort of inverse Jeffersonian grid of not of connectivity but of separation of the boreal forests in order to prospect forests. That is creating a gigantic filigree network across the Canadian plains that impedes the movement of animals and sometimes allows predators to go deep into the territories of other animals. And all of this being secreted by transformations of intellectual property right codes that make the information in the hands of the companies rather than in the hands of the preservationists of the environment and those who want to conserve the environment. So the work of territorial agency is really to document the material basis, the information about this, and make it available in as succinct ways as we can possibly manage to a public that can be both a general public and a specialized public, in order to establish the difficult negotiation to keep oil in the ground. And these are some of the images that come from the Museum of Oil, and they're really just fragments of the production, sort of a overproduction of the documentation of the material basis of oil, which is then organized, as we said, in a public setting in an actual museum that is visited by hundreds of people, in this case at ZKM. All of this, of course, is land-based. Where is the ocean? And was the question that Francesca Thyssen-Bonamita asked us at the opening of the Museum of Oil. And so I'm very happy this evening to share some of the elements of the project Oceans in Transformation at IAAC, because we share with IAAC the floor of the podium for the Start Prize. And I'm really happy that the Barrio project for reusing waste has been given the other Start Prize. So Oceans in Transformation is, again, a public diplomacy. It's a public moment of advocacy for probably the opposite of the spaces that architecture is used to consider. It's, we tend to think of the ocean as the exact opposite of land. It's the place of difficult encounters. It's a place of primordial life. It's untenable in the sense you cannot hold on to it. It's really the abyss. And Oceans in Transformation is a way in which we articulated a research project over many years to bring together the multiple agents, the multiple researchers and practitioners and activists that are dealing with the ocean at the moment of extreme fragmentation. Let me give you a quick introduction to the project.
Hello, my name is Marcus Ryman. I'm the director of TBA 21 Academy and its home, Ocean Space. Ocean Space is a new center in Venice, catalyzing ocean literacy, research, and advocacy through the lens of art. It's a collaborative platform that brings together artists and scientists, architects and activists and researchers to together foster ocean imagination and ocean action. And as we're in Venice, we chose for the second exhibition of Ocean Space, we chose to work with an architecture collective called Territorial Agency and present their work Oceans in Transformation, which is the culmination of a 3-year long-term research commission that started with the investigation of sea level rise. And what better place to investigate sea level rise than in Venice? So I invite you now to follow me into the exhibition and see the work.
Territorial Agency has been investigating the Anthropocene, the age of the transformation of the planet, for about past decade or more. trying to contribute to the amount of knowledge produced by various scholars about this particular age and the transformations it brings about. Oceans in Transformation is an attempt to unravel the mechanisms of transformations on the planet from an oceanic point of view, meaning looking at the Anthropocene from the oceans. So the question they are posing initially is, how can we sense, how can we make understand the transformations of the oceanic, whereas the ocean is an area that is invisible, that doesn't afford us a view into its body, if you want. So what instruments, what possibilities of knowing do we have in order to develop an image of the oceans and its transformation? One. And secondly, how can we bring together the various ways of knowing, the various sciences, investigations, data collected on the ocean, so that they form a body of knowledge and are syncretized as one coherent story of the ocean. And in order to do that, they have both developed an aesthetic representation. These are the fields of images and compositions that you see behind me, but also a conceptual repertoire that is very important for us to understand, because it is the ideas, the understanding, the ways of knowing that perhaps also lead us to a better safeguarding of the ocean in our future.
The project is organized by bringing together multiple data sets collected by hundreds of different research centers and that are investigating portions of the ocean and particular aspect of the ocean. And by bringing them together, forming a dynamic composition of the incoherence of the knowledges that are produced about the ocean. The oceanic is never attainable in one gaze. It's always a multiplicity. It's always a compositional condition. And so what we do is to trace trajectories that are not only spatial organizations, but they're movements around which different preoccupations and matters of concern start rearticulating our relationship with the oceanic. There are 7 trajectories that span land and ocean and re-articulate existing narratives and debates about the universalization of knowledge and its deployment as the scientific fact. And in their movement around different aspects of shift and torque of the world system and the earth system, they encounter a moment of doubt, a moment of engagement with this new figure of the Anthropocene ocean. The multiple data sets are really stemming from such a variety of institutions, and they are brought together in a dynamic engagement. Here we see like a complex image that shows just one image horizontal on your screen, but in reality they are scattered across more than 30 screens in the beautiful Church of San Lorenzo in Venice. And they indicate not only the multiple contemporary transformation of the ocean, like in this case the North Sea and the continental shelf, or the areas of future sea level rise, or the multiple engagement between land and ocean life, or the exploitation of resources, or the path of migrants and the upheavals of the relationship between for instance, the Mediterranean and its solidification into seas of ultra-determined trajectories. There are ways also in which the different sources of the data, the different sources of the measurement, and that means the different scientists, the different scientific groups, the different policymakers, the different activists are brought together in a number of public debates, in a number of public encounters to then tell each other their own concern. no longer from an expert point of view, no longer from a highly sophisticated and precise discussion with peers, but with a highly sophisticated and precise discussion in public, but demands a change in the way that we reference the ocean. And the transformations of the oceans are marked, for instance, in this trajectory that connects the North Sea via Venice, the Adriatic and the upheaval of the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and the multiple forms of empire of the Northwest Indian Ocean. So different empires emerging and disappearing and reorganizing world systems along this trajectory that is today one of the most heavily impressed spaces of the technosphere, the moment of intensification of the global supply chain and the choke points. Or it is a series of trajectories that span the Indian Ocean from the Himalayas, third pole, that is the destruction of the cryosphere, all the way down the Gulf of Bengal towards the equator and eventually Antarctica. And along that path, we encounter multiplicity of transformation of the acidity and the multiple relationships of the Indian Gyre with the monsoon, but also deep sea mining and marine protected areas coinciding with militarization zones, exploitation of labor and forms of the contemporary Belt and Road Initiative, almost comparable to aspects of the slave trade of the early modernism. And we encounter, again, these patchy images that are really difficult to grasp and to start making sense of. You need a voiceover to tell you what you're seeing. And the voiceover is provided by a multiplicity of scholars that are convened by the project and fellows, research fellows that we convened in Venice over the last 2 years to somehow accompany their research, but also to ask them to accompany the viewers. Another trajectory, for instance, investigates the destruction of the cryosphere in Antarctica and follows, in this case, from south to the equator in the Galapagos Island, the multiple interferences between the Earth system, Gaia, and the exploitation of international law by vessels that are extracting resources and overfishing the seas that are characterized by the Humboldt current, the very rich and productive current that spans the western coast of South America. And the multiplicity of data sets is thought as a possibility of imagining simultaneously a condition of precision and measurement and affect. It's this mixture between abstraction and affect that interests us. It's a condition that creates a possibility of engaging with the multiplicity of relation. Now, these are three projects, Anthropocene Observatory, Museum of Oil and Oceans and Transformation, that are, in our mind, pieces towards a similar project, which is climate peace. After the warm war that has followed the waning out of the Cold War and the reorganization of the structures of violence, we need peace. Except that in nature, in what we used to call nature, there's no peace to be found. This is the big problem of environmental studies and environmental politics. In nature, you only find conflict, you only find controversies. So how do you deal with difficulties, for instance, of keeping oil in the ground, of establishing a cultural and functional continuity between land and ocean? How do we deal with that space that is dominated by an architecture of invisibility, by an architecture of ghosting, as our friend Anne McClintock would say? How do we operate with such a magnitude of architecture and advocate for a climate peace? How do we think of a reorganization of life in the facing Gaia that is staying out before it's kept out by the multiplicity of the logistical system. The difficulty lies really in understanding that the way in which we sense the Anthropocene ocean, in which we sense the upheavals of Gaia, are only through the very imaginal technologies that have formed the basis for the extraction of value of the Anthropocene. Remote sensing, the possibility of measurement of technologies, that multi-temporal dimensions that are so characteristic of all the extractive technologies, all the logistical structures that form more and more operative images, images that rearticulate boundaries between what is human and what is non-human, between what is inert and what is alive, what is original and what is a copy. And all these very complex imaginal technologies are so close to the making of the logistical, and at the same time, they are the basis out of which we can operate a distancing, a turning from that space. And that is exactly the space that we call the climate peace space. And we think it's an architectural space that is deploying really a multi-temporal and out of sync and sometimes in sync improvisation that tries to re-emerge the notion of what it means to plan at a time when planning has been concocted and taken away from people and given to the logistical. So these are some of the questions that we are asking, and particularly we're asking them in relationship to what we think is the single largest project for the next 30 years. If in the last 30 years we've completely urbanized the world, we completely pushed for globalization, the next 30 years, the time that we've got left to decarbonize our societies, we need to augment the biosphere. We need to reshape that space of interaction between land, ocean, and atmosphere to start keeping oil in the ground and maintain a focus across these 2.5 decades, 3 decades that we have ahead of us in order to keep oil in the ground, have a continuity between land and ocean. And the architecture that we will need to deploy in that sense are really going to be architectures that we think are open on all sides. They need to be rethinking coalition and mutualities before individuation, before singularization. When within the Anthropocene, we are facing the looming condition of our past action on a future yet to come, and which is, for instance, marked here on the facade of San Lorenzo with a future sea level rise that is going to cover the current areas populated by 1.5 billion people with waters. How are we going to prepare in the next 30 years as we're decarbonizing the conditions through which we can encounter other forms of intelligence, augment the biosphere? So this is the process through which to think sea level rise, to think the ocean and oceanic from within, to start being territorial about it, another line. It's the last marker of the evening from my side of what are the territorial conditions of the climate peace. 30 trillion tons, 419 parts per million, and 4.7 meters above current sea level. If we are all good boys and girls, and we do meet the minimum goals of the Paris Agreement of maintaining global temperature at 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, that's where the sea will be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I personally really enjoyed this navigation to highly sophisticated and highly precise representation of territorial transformations. I think that it is a kind of, I mean, you're part of a group of practitioners that they're trying to indeed change the way that architecture or urban planning is operating. And not only the way that they operate, but also the way that they start to dialogue. No? You're really shaking the basis of traditional processes of analysis and planning and action. And I think that this opens up, you know, on the one hand, huge possibilities for including more agents in the conversation and in the action. But it also creates, you know, like it raises questions on who is operating and how, and I mean, who is doing what, having this information. And I'm saying that because we know that in reality, climate crisis is something that gets to benefit some, no? And if we have the tools and if we have the platforms to better understand the transformations that you have been talking about, then these people that get to benefit from climate crisis also have this information. So I think that there is a kind of a political challenge as well, no? Beyond our discipline of design or architecture, there is a huge political challenge involved on how can you really achieve that public diplomacy that you were talking about in a way that it could benefit people and it could benefit environments. So I'm not sure if that is a question anyways, no? I'm just...
No, it is. I think, it's one of the questions that is always on our mind. And we have this very weird hobby of constantly observing the material basis of the Anthropocene on one side, but also trying to engage in advocacy. We are an organization that combines the spatial analysis with action. Now, I think that, for instance, the Oceans and Transformation is a specific form because it is accompanying an art organization. So it brings together science and art. But what that makes, which is really phenomenal, and it's really the incredible work of TBA 21, is that art moves. It moves people. It makes people somehow empathic and affect that is created in these images. And imagine these are really large images that's as tall as you are, and you are surrounded by them. And there's no major message, you should do this, you should do that. And this is not even a forecast, it's like how it is today. And that very weird relationship, one-to-one, with the extremely high resolution remote sensing data and the vast magnitude of it, I think moves people and destabilizes many, and then they need to reorient themselves. And this is a condition, I think, which is peculiar to the way, or specific to the way we operate. This reorientation, this calibration of the way we become sensitive. Oceans in Transformation, as we speak, is being installed in Brest in the ambit of One Ocean Summit, which is a high-end, high-level meeting, a summit between heads of states convened by the President of France, which is running the presidency of European Union in this semester, together with heads of states from the Pacific and the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, to address the key difficult decisions to deal with the ocean. And there we'll have both the heads of states and the general public facing in the really in the center of the summit, Oceans in Transformation. So I think what is interesting is the mixing of say heads of state with the general public and being exposed simultaneously to this thing. It's not a condition that you will find usually in architecture, where you have to somehow collaborate a lot with institutions and people that can make important decisions, but the public comes in a second moment. is the users. In this particular form of architecture that we deploy, they happen at the same time. It's a public endeavor. So that's maybe a difficulty. And to reveal and to make people become sensitive to the fact that we live in a sensing world, I think is a way of in which we're also moving away from a notion of activism that is based on, say, a lack of information, a lack of understanding, so the deficit notion of activism. If only you would know what I know, you would save the dolphins. If only you would feel what I feel, you would save the forest. No? And that activism based on a deficit of either empathy or knowledge and awareness. I think we need to move well beyond that and be in the operative system, be within the structures of decision making and modify them from within. Because you're right, there's many people profiting, but the question is no longer whether there's a risk in not doing the transition. The real question is how to address the danger of not keeping oil in the ground. And that you can only do with the investors. That you can only do with the people that actually are deciding whether to extract or not. If we don't do that, we'll end up always thinking that the problem is us who want to have a meeting, so we have to use electricity, and I have to have electricity coming from a coal plant. So it's my fault. We cannot accept that. It's a collective action. It's an institutional structure. It's a public notion of architecture. We're not going to do this alone. We have to do it always together.
Any oil company reacting to the Museum of Oil project?
As you know, the oil companies are the major sponsors of any public
I could imagine.
and any large architectural organization that operates on this planet. So yes, they are.
Okay. We have a couple of questions in the chat, which are mainly some of our students that they are very excited on the data that you're working on, and they have more specific questions in how to get data of ocean bathymetry, right? Would you like to ask the question?
This is Kisher.
Yes, Kish is fine. So I'd like to know how we can, for a beginner, how can we start learning about the ocean bathymetry, the ocean currents and waves, and how that might affect land patterns in the future?
It's a very beautiful question, and it's a difficult question. The Earth rotates, and as it rotates, the water on it is put in motion through the Coriolis effect around the equator, going north and south. And of course, that movement is then encountering the land masses of the islands and the continents, which also move, floating on the sea of magma. So we have multiple movements, and the way in which the tectonic plate movement and the circulation of the ocean are coupled, if I understand correctly the question, is one of the major elements through which we know about climate change. We know that carbon dioxide is the major driver of climate change because models have been made of ocean circulation when the North and South American continent started to meet and split the circulation of the tropical oceans that was going from what is today the Pacific to the Atlantic uninterrupted. And when it started being interrupted, the Caribbean started being warmer and created the thermoline circulation that eventually the modelers managed to indicate will create particular patterns of ice and warm areas. For instance, we know that Greenland is an ice sheet because of that. So there's a particular relationship in climate change models between ocean circulation and the forms of the land. In very practical terms, on a mesoscale, on a scale that is an intermediate, that is both temporally and spatially apprehensible, let's say within a few decades, you start seeing the transformation of the circulation, which is largely measured by buoys and drifters and satellites, is already being modified by heating. One of the areas that is heating the fastest is the Arctic, and the Arctic is becoming very warm and also very brackish, and it's modifying circulation southward. But equally, the Southern Ocean is transforming very quickly. That is the basic. Who has the information? Who has the model? What is available? We tend to have a very simple basis for our work, and that we only use open access data. It's very difficult to find scientific data that is open data. That means that you can simply get without saying why you're getting who you are. It's not like you go on a website of IAAC and there's information about the lecture this evening, you copy and you paste it without telling IAAC that you've copied and pasted. Scientific data you have to announce that you're using. It's a very complex procedure. Sometimes it involves logging in data sets, and we only use publicly available information. Information that is already in the public domain, that has already been published. And in the case of the ocean in transformation, if you go on our website, you will find an entire set of tables around which data set we are using, which particular element. If you bear with me, I can show you some. Just give me a second, I need to open my browser. The data sets for the bathymetric data tend to be open in as much as they are not of national interest, but there's a fantastic project of the United Nations, UNESCO, and the International Oceanographic Organization, together with the Nippon Foundation, to collect all the information in a project called JEPCO. The European Union also has a very important program to make available scientific information directly, and there's a number of places where you can find information about that. The ways in which you will then basically operate them would be a little bit more complex than the usual architectural visualization, but I think that you can imagine how to operate that. If you go on our website and the Oceans in Transformation, you will find blah, 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 a table like this. So this is a trajectory from North Sea to Red Sea. And here you have glacier, all the data sets that we've been using. And you can go through it all, and you can click on the link. It brings you to the organization that makes the data available. And so that you, if you have time and patience, you can recreate everything that we've done and somehow review it and try to replicate the information. The difficult part, of course, is to always imagine this, if I could say so, as illustration, as a nice image that you want to put in the background. And I don't think that is the purpose of this image. The remote sensing is a completely different kind of image. It's not a map. It's not just a picture. It's the most gigantic selfie that you can imagine having taken. It's a really complex, and the way in which remote sensing data is used is always changing because it's a technology that is always moving, which demands a lot of attention not to make mistakes. Because if we start collectively making mistakes and making false claims, the entire edifice of Earth observation can fall into basically irrelevance and being completely disregarded. So watch out what you do and how you do it, have guidance, but basically everything is available directly by the scientists who collected it. There's a fantastic organization, as I mentioned, called JEPCO that collects all the bathymetric data. The ocean currents information is, in our case, the one that I showed you today, I think was mainly from University of Austin in Texas. But there's a fantastic set of researchers in Bologna at the European Mediterranean Climate Change Center that are producing equally sophisticated models.
There is a great group here, John, I'm not sure if you're aware of, they called Lobelia Earth. I'm pretty sure you know them. And they're working with satellite images and computer vision for extracting data from the oceans. And I guess this is a much more direct or much more simplified way to do it. But it's great that you have also the databases on your website, because that showcases, let's say, the complexity also of you know, how, not only how to get the data, but also how to get the different people and experts that they're working with this data in a common platform of working.
I mean, what we're interested in is bringing the people who are measuring together, you know, yeah. Because we know that there's one ocean, but at the moment we have as many oceans in the plural as there are researchers and there are people with concerns. And the question of oceans in transformation is how to compose, through the deployment of these very complex images, a space that is held in common by all these people with concerns. So that is our diplomatic encounter through a very specific form of images.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I hope I was clear, but
yeah, there is
you can have a look on the website and you can find a lot of information there.
Yeah. There's some more questions on the kind of sensors or how you get the data on the oil. Juan Yu?
Yeah, I think I already got the answer from John. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
What kind of sensor do we use for oil information? You know, if you want to understand anything about oil, you have to understand that it's impenetrable. You try to get any kind of information, you will be faced with libraries, not simple information that everybody can understand, just libraries. More and more information, more information. This is what we are facing with dealing with oil, is a gigantic engagement with creating ignorance. The oil industry is investing billions in making all of us ignorant. And I think this is the thing to be alerted to. You know, that's why it's so difficult to get any information about oil, because they don't want you to know. Not only they're not hiding it, they just don't want you to be able to be knowledgeable.
Matilde, would you like to go forward with your question?
Yeah, hi. John, thanks very much for the lecture. I was wondering, so you've discussed a lot about territorial agency, and it's been really, really interesting. And I was also interested in hearing about how within your practice you pass from territorial agency to territorial action, considering that some of, well, the topics that you're dealing with are highly complex ones. They're really complex challenges, often considered to be in some way wicked problems. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah. Territorial agency is, of course, an organization, but it's also a project. And the project of having agency that is territorial. Agency is the capacity of acting. It's the capacity of a particular entity to interact with other entities. And we think it's becoming more and more clear that it's a capacity of becoming responsive to other actions. So I don't see very much the distinction between what you're saying, territorial action and territorial agency. The territorial side of the agency is given by the fact that we are really interested in the cognitive aspect of a territory. A territory is not land. A territory is not a space that we can then represent. It's a cognitive construct. It's the relationship between our polities and what keeps them alive. And it's the warning signs that are the cognitive mark. And the question is, are they clear enough towards other entities? So the way that I would bring to think of this idea of action is really to bring it back to agency rather than to have an idea of a strategy that needs to be deployed, because I think that is really part of the problem. It's the logistical idea where concept needs to be deployed and implemented and then measured, and the structures of extraction are exactly in those terms. So agency is for us a way in which we move from matters of fact, what is it that you act on, the situation, to issues of concern, and that's why
it's a reaction, I guess.
I'm not so sure it's a reaction. Many times the problem is that let's put it like this, the earth moves against the world. And the way that we can start sensing it are not so clear. And they are delayed in time and space, and the tempo of change is so different. And the difficulty is to be alert to this, and also to live with the mess, because we did not see it coming. It's very important to understand architecture did not see this coming. We are so geared towards the future, and we did not even grasp as this figure as it was emerging from the horizon. So this is really a difficult question that you're asking, Matilda, but I think that it's for us, it's a question of doing things mutually together, never of thinking we are here now, we act. It's always about, there's too much action, so to say.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there is any other question, please let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I would also like to sum up. I mean, I really liked one of the interviews in your initial videos of one expert saying that people have become, or they are, a geological force, no, like meteorites, and I think that all the work that contributes, that people understand what is their impact, their collective impact, could probably raise the opportunity to create a path for a collective action, no? And I really enjoyed that part, and I think that it's also not an easy task what you're doing, because it's not just working on this project, but it's all the questions that you're raising around the discipline of architecture and how to reshape architecture, you said at some moment, no, in a way that we can sense this transformation, in a way that we can include in our processes of operations the observation, for instance, or the sensing and all the things that you have been showcasing in your project. So from my side, I want to really thank you on behalf of everybody for your talk. I think that a significant group of the work of the students and the faculty and our researchers here at IAAC are also working towards a similar direction, especially in our city and technology program, and trying to understand how we can use this science, the science of data, in order to create ways of representing, ways of understanding, but also, proposals for action. So in that sense, I hope we can soon join forces into a project, a research, or just another discussion as the one today. And thank you very much, John.
Reti and everyone, it's always such a pleasure to be with all my friends at IAAC, and I wish that next time we can go out and
we can have the Spanish dinner.
Have a nice drink. Vale.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you, John, and thank you all for joining us.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Ciao.